about a whole variety of topics. And this week, we're going to be talking about water management, really, very much focused on the plant, the soil side of it, and the sort of the agronomy of water management. And this week, I have the pleasure to say that I've been joined by Michael Fance, who is the technical support and European account manager for Aquatrols Europe. So welcome to the stream, Michael.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you for inviting me.
Good. And well, I'm glad to have you here and to be able to chat to you about some of my favourite topics, including water. But just introduce yourself, Michael. What is it you sort of? What is your experience, your background, and your sort of the core elements of what you do at Aquatrols?
Okay. So I came into the industry in 1983, I think it was. So a long time ago. So I think this is my 37th year, and half of my career was in golf course maintenance and sports turf maintenance. 14 years as head greenkeeper as course manager, and the other half of my career has been in consultative sales. Really, this week marks my 4th anniversary at Aquatrols, and however long it is, 20 odd months I've been employed in the role that you just said. So yes, I've got a handle on the UK turf market, but also 20 plus countries across Europe.
So up until, I guess, the current restrictions, it was quite a bit of time spent traveling around Europe, talking to people about all their different issues and challenges they're facing on their sports facilities.
Absolutely. Every week we'd be abroad for a chunk of each week.
And so it's an interesting perspective to think sort of beyond just these shores, because we're in a connected world, and nothing more shows that than the sort of the current COVID-19 situation and how we're all in it together and facing the same kind of challenges. So in terms of your experience, what are the sort of key water management challenges you're seeing in the UK and across Europe?
I think every single country has got similarity in what they're facing, i.e. maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could predict the weather, you could predict the seasons, you could predict when rainfall would come and when it wouldn't come. And although there are lots of variations across Europe, that is a theme everywhere. So, for example, the drought of 2018 was reflected in a lot of countries across Europe. Even, the hot, dry countries were saying this is extreme. And when we do get rainfall, it's often biblical proportions. So, yeah, so they're all facing issues, and whether they resolve those culturally, mechanically, biologically, or using products or whatever, they're always trying to manipulate situations to cope with these extremes of weather.
I think you've rightly hit on a fairly significant point in the fact that it is very changeable, and year on year, season on season, there's a huge amount of variation, isn't there? And so, as you rightly say, it's managing the extremes and the norm, whatever the norm actually turns out to be. And so kind of for you, sort of putting your hat on now, but also your hat on from your sort of half your career as a turf manager, what would you say was the single biggest sort of water management challenge that you face, or you think that a lot of the guys and gals out there are facing?
Yeah. Well, I would say that I was asked to write an article last year about a turf action plan using soil surfactant, wetting agent type materials. I just referred back to my career, really. So when I was in charge of golf courses, I said the weather was a lot more predictable, and everything I did was programmed. It was totally proactive. Yeah. I thought I was the greatest turf manager in the world because I'd present a plan to my staff and my boss, get the budget signed off, and they thought, and I was God. And I came across a wetting agent chemistry in the 80s that I used year on year in a way that worked for me. On a golf course, I had 5 different types of green construction, so I'd just play around with the rates and intervals using one material, because it was probably the only wetting agent on the market at the time. And somebody maintained those same greens 20 or 30 years later, that would not have worked.
Yeah.
So now I'm a great believer when you look at either being proactive or reactive, is that every aspect of turf maintenance has got to be a proactive program, no matter what it is. But you've got to be reactive with it. And quite often the weather gives you windows of opportunity to do something that, if you read a book, an STRI, Guide to the Golf Course book from the late 90s, you might say, well, I'd never do that at that time of year. But now I see people doing things you'd never read in a book at that time. But it's not wrong. They're seeing windows of opportunity. And similarly, when it comes to management of water, I was lucky enough to be at the FEGA conference in February. And they had a sort of speed dating session where the corporate sponsors had 3 or 4 minutes of each group. And what I was talking about then was the biblical rainfall in Ireland, and we were all seeing it. And then within 4 to 6 weeks, you're looking at Irish turf managers doing rain dances on social media. It just went from one extreme to another. So the fact that we can be proactive with a core program, if it comes to soil surfactants, wetting agents, as we specialise in, I do believe that more and more you need a couple of products on the shelf to deal with those extremes.
Absolutely, and I think sort of welcome to all those folk who are joining the stream now. So as and when you have a question, please fire it into the comments, and they'll pop up on our screen, and we'll go through them and answer them as we can go along. So don't be shy, don't be afraid. There is no such thing as a silly question. I've asked lots of them, and that's how you expand your knowledge. So feel free, don't feel inhibited. Any question is a good question, and look forward to answering them. So getting back to the topic, Michael, I think absolutely kind of an integrated sort of overview or view of your management, a kind of a holistic view of your management. And water is a sort of one of the single most important, if you like, biologically active molecules there is. It is the thing which defines everything in any life form needs water to some degree or the other, because biology fails on the planet Earth without water. And in fact, looking further afield into the stars with NASA, what is it they're looking for on planets looking for extraterrestrial life? Water. Yeah. And so its management and its role is critical for me, and sort of for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree, but for me, part of the essence of managing turf is managing soil and water and the harmony and the interaction between the brown stuff, the blue stuff, and the green stuff. And it's where they all come together that's really important, and that's really the key function of a management program. And I think for me, water is a central component to everything we do as turf managers, as people which are involved with growing plants.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the current sort of odd situation we're in terms of restrictions on golf courses, trying to limit exposure of staff, trying to limit activities going on, what are you seeing as being the common sort of issues associated with water management that we're having at the moment?
That's a really good point, because I would say if people are following the guidelines of minimal maintenance, they may be not spending the time doing the measuring with the VMC levels on their greens. They're not so worried about the playability. They've also gone for many, many weeks without any people giving them any opinions on their playability. That might be a good thing. I'm a great believer that yes, you measure a lot and you might play golf a lot, but you do rely on a bit of feedback sometimes. So what I'm thinking of with when this does change and we do have the ability to up that intensity of maintenance, I'd say there's a few key things people will be considering, and that is using their knowledge of their site, i.e. going through the summer, what is your optimum volumetric moisture content reading at the particular time of day that you take them. So you know you've got that in your back pocket. That's what we're aiming for. So once you do get on top of measuring, you know where you want to try to be. I would say this is obviously going to be done in conjunction with increasing frequency of cut and reducing height of cut and some other things. So that might put some stresses on the plant that hasn't had for a few weeks. But also knowing where your wilting point is on your site, for example. So when you get that situation where people are walking across your greens and those footmarks aren't standing up again because the turf grass plant isn't turgid, know where you actually reach that point And when you're going further, when you start to become hydrophobic. So hopefully people have that as numbers or from their own experience and feel and the art of greenkeeping. Those are the things to think of. I've also talked to a few people now about the amount of water they've actually got left to use this year. So I think you've got to factor that in. And it might not be the same as if the season had been continuous. You might even have more water than you had before. A big problem across Europe, the drought of 2018 didn't just cause problems with that year. Those natural resources of lakes and reservoirs haven't been replenished. So, is there a change in your approach to your wetting agent soil surfactant based on where you are now, where you want to be, how you're going to get there, and how much water you've got to play with, really?
And I think that's a great point, and it's something that I think it's easy to do, isn't it, when we're kind of living in the here and the now, worrying about the problems now. And in reality, some of these problems, especially water and water management, water availability, water security, these are long-term policy challenges that we have to face. And that's certainly something that I know my colleague, Dr. Tom Young, who was on a stream a few weeks ago, he and I were talking about was in relation to the Golf Course 2030 initiative, looking at longer term infrastructure improvements in terms of water management. So kind of what should we be thinking about in terms of security of water? Can we rely on that borehole? Can we rely on the irrigation ponds, the lakes, abstraction? How are we going to need to become more self-sufficient? Because I guess if we look at, and I certainly know from my perspective, looking at rainfall figures across Bingley, from the trial facility at STRI HQ, we're seeing there's no drop off in rainfall. It's just how the rain and the water is being delivered and when it's coming. And I think there's opportunities to be a lot smarter with water management on that infrastructure scale. But I think very much for me, having you guys here and having you here to talk about as well some of the solutions which are in the bottle and how we use those better, I think is really important. And I think sort of your colleague Peter there, who's started the ball rolling with some questions. Thank you, Peter. And it mirrors a question I've got. So, wetting agents, are they the miracle bullet? Are they the silver bullet that's going to solve our problems? Discuss.
Mm-hmm. I have a phrase in a presentation saying that the answer to good turf management doesn't come in a bottle or a bag, but the correct use of soil surfactants to achieve site-specific goals is just a tool in your toolbox. And as Peter's asked there, do you think that one product can cover all bases? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So obviously look at different sports. So we're not just talking about golf, we're talking about all sports. But I don't know a single sport played on natural turf where one technology can tick all the boxes. Now you may be able to choose one to be the best in that respect. It might be down to lack of budget, etc. And that's where it comes to giving prescriptive advice, really, and taking into account everything agronomically and budget. But no, there's not one chemistry, I think, that tick all the boxes.
And I think sort of Eric, welcome back to the stream. Good to see you again. You always come up with some cracking questions, so pleased that you can ask a few brain tinglers as well. And Eric's asked a question here: can you discuss the trend for mixing penetrant and retention wetting agents? Which I think almost a step before that is how we classify surfactants, wetting agent technologies, and we use the term sort of penetrant wetting agent and a retentive wetting agent. Could you just give us a bit of background for how that comes about? Is it accurate? Is it right? Are we using the right terminology? I mean, there's quite a bit of debate goes on perennially about this.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to move away from all these terms that are used in marketing, but I end up using them myself. So it's the industry speak, and if I termed it any other way, people would think I was an alien and just landed from another planet. So we understand your terminology, Eric, totally. So I would say that now we sell blends that you would refer to as a penetrant and a retainer. We sell a blend that is two penetrants together, etc. So the key thing I would say in that regard is whichever brand you're talking about, make sure people have got robust independent data to back up what they're saying. And if they claim it does both, ask them to explain why. Ask them to explain a bit more scientifically the theory behind the blend of that product. So we have a product, for example, that I term as facilitating infiltration and penetration. It's like a double penetrant. So it gets water in very quickly and it keeps it going downwards. We've got another one which I refer to as facilitating infiltration and dispersion, and I could explain the theory behind that. So yeah, we don't particularly elaborate in our marketing, but the people that we have employed for us and our distributor partners all over Europe are all trained up enough to know our products inside out. So the other thing about having a mix, it definitely mitigates against extremes. So if somebody hasn't used a wetting agent, they think, well, what am I going to use? I don't know what the weather's going to be like this year. It's not a bad thing to start off with a blended product and have some surfactant in there, and then maybe tweak your program. And it is a programmed approach. There are products, yes, we'll say put them down every 4 weeks. As I said before, having those couple of technologies on your shelf just to mitigate against extremes can really help.
I mean, and sort of, I think we've kind of often come across the terms penetrant and retentive wetting agents. We also come across sort of preventative and curative type approaches as well, which links across a whole variety of different sort of management solutions for turf. I mean, kind of, what do you believe is the key differential between those two approaches, between that preventative and that curative type model of dealing with potentially some of the same issues?
Well, there's a number of technologies you could class as preventative, and it depends what you're trying to prevent. Now, back in the day when I was using that old technology, I was trying to prevent dry patch. That's what I was mainly trying to do. And so if we're talking about preventative as preventing dry patch situation, you can do that with a number of technologies, but the key thing is start early. And with most of them, it means starting a month before the onset of stress, really. So you can achieve preventative results, i.e. not allowing the symptoms of dry patch to actually form, in a number of ways with different technologies. But the key thing with all of them would be to start early. And every one of them would hold water slightly differently, but they would all be preventative.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and so what's your view on sort of a 12-month program for wetting agents versus those folk which say, well, okay, it's now March, I'm going to start my wetting agent application. What do you think are the sort of relative merits and sort of disadvantages to those two styles of approaches are? The 12-month program versus the definite start-stop to the season?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what I said about one of my starting points when I visit a site or talk to people over the phone or whatever is, where are you now, where you want to be, and how are we going to get there? And if their major goal is the management of moisture, for example, from their irrigation system, they might only be talking about a 6-month program to utilise any water they've got. If they're really talking about turf health and they're talking about year-round turf health, then they start evolving into using what we've referred to as a penetrant to just dry out that interface between the plant and the root zone and to change the environment where fungal spores might be sitting to make them less likely to become a problem. So then you get into that year-round. So we have a particular technology that some people use year round. We have people using the same technology 6-7 months of the year, and maybe 5 or 6 months of the year, something totally different just to dry out the top, depending on grass species, soil type, whatever the goals are at that site. But definitely more and more you see it as a year-round program.
Yeah, and I think again, changing technologies, and perhaps we'll come back to that, and the ability to change between different types of technologies or products as we go through. But I think Rob Marchbank, who's written a great question here, which is, and something I think on probably a lot of people's minds at the minute, given the prolonged period of dry weather, soil temperatures coming up, soil biology becoming more active again. What's the best wetting agent to keep fairy rings from becoming hydrophobic? Rob's tried a few, and nothing have really given him that effect he's after. So in terms of wetting agents and fairy ring management, what's been your experience of that and perspective?
It's a great question. And it's a topic that doesn't have one single answer. As you're more than aware, there's all sorts of things going on there. But I'm sure we get somebody to come to see you, Rob. But I'd say the key thing there is the timing of a surfactant in a mixture with something such as azoxystrobin, and a programmed approach to that. So if it is obviously hydrophobic conditions caused by fungal activity, there's a hell of an expense involved in applying our products and a fungicide. So the key thing is to get your timing right on that and bang some holes in. What I tend to do with fairing, I tend to take a core out and see how deep it is actively making soil hydrophobic, and I would tine just to below that depth, and I would use the surfactant of choice with a fungicide and apply on the day of aeration or the day after, and water in heavily and repeat every 2 weeks until it was cured. Now, that is a budget issue, but that is the bog standard advice I would give. I'd rather visit the site and look at it myself and see the history, and the incorporation of certain biostimulants can often help in that scenario, even straight seaweeds. So yes, it's very site specific, but generally my general rules of thumb would be using something such as azoxystrobin, tank mixing it with your chosen surfactant. We've got a lot of data supporting how our products have been mixed with azoxystrobin in that regard. I'd always aerate just below the depth of hydrophobicity. I would never aerate below that, but I'd make sure I got down through it so that any application you made, once it's irrigated in, has got a great chance to carry that fungicide to where you need it to work. And any particular wetter, I'm not going to mention any of our products, but if you want to directly or any of my colleagues, I'm sure we can discuss that. But I'm a great believer that on our market there isn't so much as a bad soil surfactant wetting agent. I think the key things to understand is what they do, to question the claims that are made, and there's only a few that are particularly, I would say, harmful in any way, shape, or form if they're overused. But yeah, just ask the right people, ask your peers, ask the contacts you trust, ask qualified people, ask companies that have got robust independent data. But yeah, I will tell you now that you could follow a program of our tank mix and I could recommend it, and in some places it wouldn't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been there for so long.
And so I think, and Rob sort of is giving the thumbs up on that one. I think you're absolutely right. Is that you have to tailor, as with everything. There is no such thing as the Dummy's Guide to Greenkeeping or Groundsmanship, which if you follow it prescriptively, you will have the ultimate playing surface. Of course, it's the site specificity, but I think it's a good point to have that conversation. I think it goes across the board. If you have a question, speak to the experts, speak to people which you can trust and rely on to give you some good advice and to help you find the right solution for you. And often it is a solution, and it's more than just necessarily what's in the bottle. It's often a whole load of other things that go around that in terms of how to get the best out of any treatment, the cultural practices, the watering practices, all that stuff. I think that's got a sort of a major role to play in that. And so
I would add that's become more and more popular for people who have had a history of fairing is them continuing treatment throughout the winter.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
because the symptoms are masked by the onset of autumn winter rainfall, those issues are still there. So I do find that people are doing even like handheld applications, watering can applications to sites that they know have been perennial fairy rings, because if you can stop that really drying down, you've got half a chance.
And I think that's absolutely right. And I know that the work that Jenny Keithley did in a PhD, which was looking at fairy ring in particular, found that perhaps when our mindset was we started to get a little dry, I need to get a wetter on, was finding that actually putting the wetting agent on a lot sooner than perhaps you think is one of the keys to fairy ring management, because you don't ever get to a condition where the soil is becoming as hydrophobic as it could be, and you are preventatively trying to resolve any hydrophobicity that's there and stop it from becoming a severe problem, which is causing potentially sort of dry patch and death in the turf. So very much, and from what Jenny was talking about, it's kind of like, yeah, if you're beyond February and you've got a lot of fairy ring and you're a dry site, you could be in trouble. So I think very much sort of when we're talking to greenkeepers and ground staff that suffer fairy ring problem, it's a year-round management, and you've got to look at the other elements of your program as well to get the best out of it. And Carol's asked a good question here. Autumn time, what type of wetting agent is the best on sand topsoil and natural ground pitches? And I think that's a good question, because one of the things that often comes to me is, I've got a wet, soggy soil. Can I apply penetrant wetting agent and it's going to dry my surface out? My answer is normally hold your horses. I don't think so. There may be some other issues, but I mean, what are the challenges with the perceptions, perhaps, or water management in that wetter time of the year? We have plenty of experience of that October, November, December time last year. What's your perspective on that synergy between wetting agents and winter play, if you like?
So the first thing, and I've learned this through experience, is to check the drainage. So I've been to a football ground in professional football here where I've actually found the outlet, and I don't think any water had ever come out of it since it was built. So use of one of our products wasn't the solution. It might have been part of the program thereafter, but you've got to go back to basics. So if you check that the drainage is functioning correctly, compaction isn't an issue, so structure isn't an issue, and all the right things are being done with regard to the quality, the texture of the soil, etc. And then get on to whether there's a surfactant and actually help. And to be honest, if those things aren't right, it isn't the first, port of call on their approach. But Carol's question is a really good question. So notwithstanding that those things are all in place and you're looking for playability on a pitch that may or may not be playable if you didn't apply something, that is a real key thing now that's really becoming important. And in televised sport as well. We advised a product on a televised natural turf sport in the US a few years ago, and they say that the game wouldn't have gone ahead if it hadn't been applied that day. So that playability is key. But so from Carol's point of view, I would say that how do you define how sandy the sandy topsoil is? But going back to the terminology we were using, on a natural soil pitch, you'd use something that's a pure penetrant, and maybe on the one that's got a sandier root zone, you might use a blend. So you facilitated that infiltration and you kept the top dry, but you held a little bit more because you might still have growing conditions where the plant needs a bit of water.
Absolutely, and kind of you've said the key points I was going to raise there in terms of surfactants are good for getting water moving through pore structure or pore space. That's what they're there for. It's in that the water films around soil particles and in the gaps between soil particles. If they're full of water to begin with because it's backed up from beneath, that's your dominant problem. But to get the water in and through, then absolutely, that's where the benefit can come. So I think it's certainly not a silver bullet, but it can be a considered and an important part of an autumn-winter program. But if you have a clay soil, you probably have some other issues that you need to resolve first before you perhaps expect the super benefit out of that surfactant, I guess, going in.
Yeah, the other thing on that regard is that if you have uniform infiltration of water at the surface, water doesn't run across it down to the lower areas, which become incredibly wet. So you can use it not just for the playability of the whole site, but you actually reduce runoff. And you might actually want runoff, to be honest. You might want runoff if you go to a ditch next box. Yeah? Therefore, runoff means you go to a low-lying playing area and it causes it to become unplayable. We've got some fantastic data on some technologies that can really reduce runoff, reduce time to runoff, etc. That it can be part of your armory, really.
Absolutely, and there's another thing as well that comes across is that, and it's not a directly related question that's come up, but it's something in my mind working and playing with, is this kind of interface that we're talking about now with the biostimulants and metabolite-based products are becoming a lot more common in turf management programs across the board, golf, football, course turf management. And one of the things is getting that product, if it's not a leaf absorbed product, getting it into the rhizosphere, getting it so that it can be absorbed by the roots. And it occurs to me that that synergy between a wetting agent program and that bionutritional, if you like, that kind of biostimulant, if it's a root uptake, that could provide real benefit to get it where it needs to be for the plant to take it up and actually show real benefit.
Absolutely. And that isn't just with biostimulants, it's with plant protection products, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides. So it depends on the legislation of the country where we're working. But placement of a turf beneficial material can be assisted by the use of the correct surfactant. No doubt about that.
And I think sort of under these current conditions, I just look outside, talk to my groundsmen and greenkeepers at Bingley and the guys across the industry, and certainly the thoughts are very much, look, we haven't had any meaningful rain in large parts of the UK for at least 6 weeks, if not longer. And kind of we are irrigating now. Soils are drying out after the winter months. There were points in the winter you were squelch your ground thinking, will this ever dry out? The answer is yes, now. And sort of kind of the use of wetting agents to help maximize the effectiveness of irrigation and any rainfall we get is really important. And what are your thoughts about sort of, we can measure the overall moisture content and get understanding of overall soil levels, but what's been your experience about the importance of just the natural variation we can get in playing surfaces, and how important it is to manage that from a water and soil management point of view?
Well, you generally find if you have inconsistencies in the placement of moisture through a profile, you have inconsistencies reflected at the surface. So I'm a great believer in the use of these gadgets now to measure VMC, but you can use them and you can use them. And I think the first thing I do on a site, if somebody's got a problem, I will take a twin-bladed hole cutter, take a plug out. I will have already taken a measurement from the surface exactly where I want to put the hole cutter. I go straight to the bottom of the hole and put the gauge in there, and I slide a blade up and do at least 4 measurements. And sometimes it tells you absolutely nothing. Sometimes it can tell you absolutely everything. And it's like a light bulb moment sometimes for people. So as much information as you can get, I would say, gives you, far more ability to give the right conclusion. But essentially, variation of moisture content affects variation of plant health. There's absolutely a direct correlation.
Absolutely. So again, that should be a part of our management thinking, is consistent surfaces, not only across time but also spatially within surfaces. We know we naturally get variations across greens, for example. That might be due to a whole variety of factors, such as foot traffic, level of organic matter accumulation, level of sort of compaction, as well as kind of plant demand and plant stress as well. So I think, as with all things, spatial variation is critical. And one of the things we've seen doing the surfactant trials over all these years is that they can have a marked effect on improving that consistency. And that's one of the, once you get things in the sweet spot overall where you're happy with them, for me that's the next level of fine detail you start looking at, is that spatial element to it. And I think this is what I think Eric's written a fairly hefty question here, and I'll read it out for everybody because it's even that long we can't get it on screen. So what Eric's saying is that I've had issues with USJ greens constructed without a moisture barrier because of the soil sand interface. The perimeter of the green and the surrounds consistently suffer from drought stress. What could we do about that? And that, I think, is the prime case, as you were saying, Michael, in terms of different situations, different soil types, different problems, and the interface between them. Absolutely.
So I've got a particular testimonial that springs to mind. So Kiowa Island on the river course out in South Carolina, they had a very similar issue. It was mainly caused by the root zone for the greens, completely different root zone for the collar, and behave totally differently. So it's slightly different, but similar symptoms at the surface with turf quality. And we have a particular granular product they put on using a drop spreader, so you could do incredibly localized applications, even over the top of their normal chosen wetting agent surfactant, and got amazing results from that. So other granulars are on the market. I would say ours is unique, which it is, and I've got more than enough end user feedback that have used it in exactly the same way. So where they've had collar decline from mower traffic, etc., turning of mowers, whether it be a change in the construction, or as Eric says, that interface between one root zone and another without a barrier, it's become another tool for the armoury. What I would suggest is try a little bit and see what it does for you. You know, I'm not going to have all the answers for everybody's questions on a live Facebook Q&A, but that's what I've found. And I've found that, you know, I've got some of my European distributors asking questions on here, and they will recommend it for that use in many, many places.
Absolutely. And it's the kind of same sort of mentality. If you're thinking about bunker tops or those areas that tend to burn off quickest, your south-facing bunker tops, then use those same approaches you would use on those areas in a localized fashion to help deal with that. And I think that's often the case when you get quite a bit of disparity between two different materials, and we see it as two different materials from a soil point of view, but the plant doesn't, and it straddles across, and you get water and capillary pull from one to the other, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But from a practical treatment point of view, treat it like bunker tops, and a kind of think about it in that kind of way. And I think
always, sorry, but as we all know, shortcuts in construction are paid for many years to come, and just by doing that, the cost of that would have been minimal compared with the cost of trying to work in that situation.
Absolutely. And Ashley here's asked the question, are granular wetting agents any good? Of course, you're going to be slightly biased, Michael, and of course they say they are, but we've also had some experience using granular wetting agents, and as both surface applications and as sort of inclusions in growing media. And yeah, they do what they say on the tin, and often have a number of different advantages and different perhaps usages sometimes to liquid formulations. So from your point of view, I know you guys have got some. What's been your experience with them being used in the field? What are people using them for? And kind of what are the pros and the cons?
What I would say is that generally speaking, a granular application is there for somebody who hasn't got a sprayer, or is trying to apply to a site that is impossible to spray, etc., etc. So historically, they've been there for that. What I find more and more now, especially with the extremes of weather, again, there's another tool in the armoury. So I would quite often see people carrying a bag of our product on a vehicle non-stop in the summer. And wherever they see on a given day, they will use it. So they have their places. I would say key things to ask is the technology of the surfactant that's being used, whether it's being coated on the granule, impregnated, what the carrier is, the carrier biodegradable, etc., etc. But even at the high rates, you generally don't have as much surfactant going down as you would with a liquid. So if you are looking for a curative, really, really, really extreme situation, you'd be putting more what we call the active ingredient down in our liquid than you would in our granule. However, having said that, I haven't seen many situations where our granule hasn't done the job that people are asking for. So, yes, and whether you're looking to be preventative or curative, what I normally find is that it's all about curative. There aren't many people using granulars as preventative.
No.
There's a few, but not many.
Yeah, I can imagine. And just sort of the third mechanism really that I guess a lot of people are considering now and starting to use, because some people I've already spoken to are hand watering particular areas to save on irrigation. That's obviously more difficult when you've got restricted staff numbers, but as staff start coming back to courses, then there'll be more hand watering. Sort of what's your view of the best way to deploy sort of surfactant technologies through a hand watering type approach?
The thing about that is whether you're looking to be preventative or curative. So if you look at high molecular structure pellets, they're the same sort of technology as you get in the liquids, but they're there as a stopgap, I would say, between being in control and getting really hydrophobic. So they have their place, but if you've gone to the point where it has become totally hydrophobic, you really need to be looking at something else, I would say. I think that this all comes back to things like timing of irrigation, time of your hand watering, utilising those resources where they're not going to be affected so much by evaporation, etc. So, for example, one of the biggest issues in 2018 was evapotranspiration rates were so high that guys just didn't have enough water to replenish them. So, you know, people who were advocates of a particular technology, whether it be ours or somebody else's, were suddenly thinking during the season, hold on a minute, I cannot replace the amount of water I'm losing. Can I use a different surfactant technology to mitigate against that for maybe 4, 6, 8 weeks, and then go back to what I believe in and what's the best for this site long term? And you'll never totally change the nature of your site by switching a surfactant for a few weeks. You might use the wrong product at the wrong time of year, maybe hold a bit too much water and vice versa. But the general approach of using, for example, a reverse block copolymer to hold a bit more water during incredible dry times doesn't mean you're going to change your sward composition overnight because you're holding a little bit more water. But it helps mitigate against the stress on the plant, your irrigation system, and the turf manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen the benefits, talking of the summer of 2018, I've seen the benefits on formal wetting agent trials on very thatchy situations where this is prime candidates for hydrophobicity on organic layers which dry out. And certainly sort of a year after application, it's not because there's any residue potentially in the soil, it's because we've addressed hydrophobicity, and the levels of hydrophobicity in the treated plots were low to begin with, and that when we got into that dry summer period of 2018, they stayed a little bit healthier for longer because the hydration, the water was better managed throughout that profile. And then when it came to applications of irrigation to keep the turf alive, the water went in, and that it was able to sort of penetrate and actually get down to the roots to where the plant wanted it. And so the long-term benefits, not necessarily from a residual effect of the actual compounds themselves, but more as having dealt with those turf challenges, especially in those thatchy situations, you're promoting some pretty positive long-term benefits and changes.
One of the scenarios I was going to quote was I visited a site in 2018, and the greenkeeper inherited a real issue with thatch, and our, whether you called it curative or a remedy, was to get some live grass cover on those greens. It wasn't the solution. Solution was he knew he had to get stuck into that thatch mechanically and get it out, but he also had to secure a job when he was in his probationary period. So the results we got in a very short time, given the right technology and localized applications, were absolutely astounding. And the golfers would have thought they're amazing, but the problem hadn't been solved. The problem needed some more deeper thinking. It just bought him some time to get the confidence of the people there, whereas he could then roll out his mechanical operations thereafter. The other thing I was going to say is that when it comes to this sphere of products that we're talking about today, is that we advocate being diagnostic and being prescriptive. And when people say old technologies, well, they're all old technologies, really. Just some people have found different ways of blending them and finding different balances in the blends, like we were talking about. But you've got to realise that some of these things that are referred to as old are still really good.
Absolutely. Just don't throw out old things or old ideas, old technologies, just because they may not be the newest and the sexiest. It's amazing for me how cyclical all life is in general, and that what is considered new and sexy one minute is old the next. 5-10 years later, we're going back to it again, because so ultimately for me, it all comes down to, if the tool works and is doing the job you want it to do, then the tool has value. Absolutely. And as long as you understand what it's doing, why it's doing it, and how to integrate it into your management program, then there's the benefit. But I think we do tend to suffer a little bit, my own personal opinion, and it's a human factor. I think the grass is always greener. There's always got to be something newer, shinier, and better out there. So I think that's there is a little bit of that syndrome. No matter where you are, whether it's wetting agents, fertilizer, fungicides, equipment, there's always got to be something around the horizon. I think that's just human condition, isn't it? Really.
Mm.
And I think we'll. There's a couple more questions there. I think Rob. I think we've more or less covered it, but I think just to recap. Yes, for me, wetting agent program in the winter can have benefit. Absolutely. You've got to have the underlying drainage to support that, because if you haven't got the underlying drainage, then you are much better spending your time and effort focusing on improving your surface quality, your top dressing, your drainage. That'll give you the benefit. So surfactants, absolutely. If you're looking to get water past layers, into layers, and through into drainage, go for it. But you've got to have the support infrastructure there to deal with it, which I think is what we covered earlier. And there's a question here from Martin Parish. And what Martin's asked is, we're seeing much more flexibility with wetting agents in terms of blends and application rates. How do different surfactant chemistries work depending on application rate? What are the reasons for using lower or higher label rate? Quite a broad question. Well, it is quite a broad question. And I guess it's some of the things we perhaps touched on a little bit, but it's application rate and how do we determine the optimum application rate for surfactant technologies?
It's a very, very good question, but as Martin has said, it's a very broad question. We've been discussing this internally a bit recently, and there are certain technologies that have an optimum rate of application. If you put them any higher, they don't do any more, and they won't do anything better for you. So a particular product that we have at an incredibly low rate, there isn't really any benefit to upping that rate. Whereas you've got some other products that if you up the rate, the more you put on, the more it does, really. The other thing about rate of application, you've got to understand placement of that technology. So if you put the product on at a rate and you don't place it down through the profile, it's just going to be incredibly high rate at the surface. So it could have a negative effect, in fact. Or you might want that to be there for that reason. But it's all about placement. And if you start early with the program and you look at the amount you put on in the whole season in the round, you can split those as lower rates. You can reduce interval times or increase interval times depending on what the turf is telling you, what the conditions are telling you. So what I would say is that if you're looking at various rates of application, I would never, ever, although we are guilty of this sometimes, I would never look at variable rates as to linking with the site. So greens, that rate, tees, that rate, fairways, that rate, because turf is turf, soil is soil, water management issues are water management issues. So what the variable rates do give you is the turf manager the chance to be more prescriptive on their own site, knowing that the products are tested at those rates. And I was involved in launching Tronex Pack Ether with Primo Max many years ago, and we came out with these standard programs. Within 3 or 4 years, nobody was following those standard programs because they found the programs that worked for them. Started learning from your customer. And similar with some of these variable rate products. No two turf sites are the same, even within a site. So sometimes people are really doing prescriptive programs themselves that work for them, and also working within their budget.
Absolutely, and I think we see this across the board, don't we? Really, each site is its unique microcosm. It has its own environment, it has its own ecosystem, it has its own sward botanical composition, which has evolved through what seeds we put in, what survive our maintenance and management, what survives play. Everything needs to be tailored. I think for me, a lot of the rate information is there to help guide thinking, guide where we should be at, and also what we should be safe doing. Especially if we look back to some of the older technologies that were perhaps a little hotter, you would certainly be very cautious about rate. I think as technologies have advanced, the safety aspect of surfactant technologies in water management have become a lot easier to use. There's less hazard and risk. There's always some risk associated, but I think it's very much tailored to your site and find what works for you. So it's exactly the same as you would say with a moisture probe, isn't it? You might have an optimum of, let's say, 15 to 25 in your head, but for your site, for your moisture probe, for this green, actually, my benchmark should be around about 18. But for a green which is a bit higher up on the site, then it's something different. That green, which is the lowest lying part of the course, probably going to have the hold the water the longest. We might need to have a different threshold, try and keep that a little drier, maybe using different technologies potentially for different reasons. And I guess it's ultimately coming back to the most tailored approach you can have to produce the results you're after. I think that's the key thing, isn't it? You've got to produce the results in terms of playing surfaces that players want to play on, whether it's golf, football, or equestrian surfaces. So I think we've been now going on for nearly 50 minutes, and for the risk of me talking and talking, because I will talk and talk, and I love all things turf and tech, we probably should start wrapping it up there. So thank you very much, guys, for all your questions. If you have any further questions, please feel free to add them to the comments, and then we'll come back to you with some answers on some of the questions, if there are any that have come up after we've finished, or that you're watching this sort of a repeat, not on Dave, hopefully. Other channels are available. And you think, I wish I was there live to ask the question. Don't let that stop you. Ask the question. Both Michael and myself are not hard to find online through various different channels. Give us a call. We're always happy to talk to people about particular issues they may have and potential solutions. So thank you very much. And a big thank you to Michael. Really great to have you on the stream. Thanks for coming along and giving us your perspective on water management with a obvious particular bent towards surfactants and how we can get the best out of them. So thank you very much.
A pleasure.
And as usual, guys, thank you very much. We'll be back next week, 4 o'clock. I think it may be me again. So you get a double whammy. Happy days. And in the meantime, have a good week. Stay safe, and we'll catch up with you soon. Take care, guys. Bye.
Stay safe.